thanks to all of you in the room for coming to today's discussion about environmentally sound management for e-waste, circular economy, and trade. My name is Alexander Barteiger. I'm working for German Development Corporation. I will chair and moderate the session today. As well, a big thank you to the participants online. We will have two presenters as well online that will then join the discussion later. Having said that, I would right now guide through the agenda of today's talk. So next slide, please. So first, there will be a short introduction into the topic. So we're interested in environmentally sound management of e-waste, trade and circular economy, and I would like to make the case why that is necessary. Then we will have a panel from experience from practice. So Jana Mandl from Prevent Waste Alliance, as one of the coordinators of the working group, will speak about a report that we have done on practical experiences from small and medium enterprises with the Basel PIC procedure, and another pilot we have been running in Tanzania on the implementation of the technical guidelines of identifying whether something is a used good or e-waste. And secondly, Alexander Jandrich, the co-managing director of the STEP initiative, will do a soft launch of a report they have done on the situation in Latin America. It has already been launched in Spanish, but the English document is to be launched today to some extent, and he will present on that one. And we'll then proceed with a panel on concrete piloting, implementation, and innovation, and I will introduce the panelists then. So without further ado, let's go to the presentation that I will give on the topic. So I'm working for a global advisory program in GIZ. Next slide. We normally develop and finance concepts, publications, trainings. We support networks. We focus on e-waste, marine litter, climate, and municipal waste management. Our project has a global component, the 3 country components, one in Ghana, Colombia, and Vietnam. And we happen to host as well the Secretariat of the Prevent Waste Alliance, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership working on circular economy. Jana will later speak more to that topic. In the line below, you see some of the publications we have been supporting in the past. So there's a long history of e-waste projects we have been doing. We have been working on the integration of the informal sector. We have been supporting as well the publication of the Global E-Waste Monitor. We have been supporting the Person in the Port project, where we were analyzing incoming flows of used goods into a harbor in Nigeria. And we are predominantly supported by the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. Next slide. So why is GIZ speaking about environmentally sound management in e-waste? In fact, we're one of the biggest players there. So only in the headquarters of GIZ, I'm not working for all those projects, but we have a couple of projects working on the topic. One is the project I work in. Then there's a cluster working on energy efficiency, and they try to deal as well with the end-of-life management of their equipment. Then there's a cluster working on access to energy, so SDG 7. On the right-hand side, you see a slide of the countries where they already have e-waste management activities, and it's going to increase. As well, the digital cluster is working on e-waste management. Right now, for example, they support Rwanda in developing an e-registry for an EPR scheme. We have our mobility colleagues that start to focus on end-of-life management for e-buses or the buses. And we have the Prevent Waste Alliance. Additionally, in Ghana, we have a large bilateral cooperation project. I happened to work there for 3 years. In Nigeria, we supported the government to develop a policy on lead acid and lithium-ion batteries. In Ethiopia, we supported as well the government to develop battery policies. In Kenya, we're right now working on a solar PRO and as well on a curriculum for sustainable e-waste management. In Kosovo, we support EPR. In Rwanda, Colombia, and Peru, we have circular economy projects that partly focus on e-waste. And in India, we have a long-standing history of supporting private sector actors to develop solutions, mostly along the line of EPR. So next slide, please. So what does e-waste management look like in many of the partner countries of BMZ? So there is, to some extent, or I would say largely, informal e-waste collection, dismantling, and recycling. This is highly efficient and provides livelihood for many. And they're mostly focused on the scrap value of the electronics. So it's not a service they provide, it's rather a business-oriented activity. And there is the tendency to cherry pick valuable fractions, while other fractions can then be dumped or burned. And there's very little collection of non-valuable e-waste types. For example, when we did an analysis in Ghana, we didn't find a single e-waste collector collecting lighting equipment. So that ends up completely in municipal solid waste, and that's something to be done. And this can lead to major environmental and health impacts. So what is the situation right now if you're a recycler in a small and medium company over there? So in most countries in the world, you have some companies that try to or do recycle in a sustainable way. And sometimes for them, not all fractions they create from manually dismantling those equipment, there's a local, or sometimes there's no local solution. So if you do not have a local solution, for example, for hazardous fractions, like the lighting equipment, so CFL bulbs, either you accumulate on your yard or you hand over to actors who might do things you do not want them to do, or you have to be able to ship it, else you're not a compliant recycler. So it's a prerequisite for them, if there is no local solution, to find solutions elsewhere. So that's a difficulty for them to formalize. And additionally, some as well of the valuable fractions, there are no local markers. And the processes you would see locally, like, for example, acid leaching of printed circuit boards, we do not want to see that happening. And those type of, well, if you go to YouTube, you can see how to do it. It's very easy, but it's very difficult to ship them in a compliant way to sustainable recyclers somewhere else. And additionally, oftentimes the local volumes are not large enough to justify investment. So in a nutshell, there's oftentimes no level playing field for sustainable e-waste management on the ground. And that's, I would say, the framework we operate in there. Next slide. And if we want to have these pathways, we are basically competing with actors that are non-compliant. So we need as well additional finance, and we need the pathways. So we need appropriate treatment infrastructure and standards to be compliant. We can as well utilize the informal collection schemes, repair and dismantling networks, and we need as well the possibility to export some fractions when no treatment options are within the country. And secondly, we need finance as well to create thriving private sector enterprises who want to solve the problem. So they need infrastructure support. They need as well support for operational costs, for transport, collection, recycling, and as well for system costs. And there's another idea that they might be paid for avoiding externalities. So next slide. So these are, I would say, four of the most generic financing options you can find for environmentally sound management of e-waste. One is the revenues you can get from the valuable fractions. So printed circuit boards are an example of that one, but as well copper cables, or in general the metal fractions. And for example, for copper, in many countries there is no local market. So it has to go to export, and is not bad in itself, because most of the times there's no treatment option for the coating of the cables. So if the cables with the coating got out of the country, that's a good treatment pathway. Secondly, you can receive payments or fees or taxes by waste generators. There can be government funding, subsidies, and last but not least, there's a lot of discussion about EPR, and we'll see that in the next slide. So we have been discussing internally a lot, okay, what could be, or how could systemic change towards environmentally sound management of e-waste can look like? And long term, there is, at least GIZ internally, an agreement that EPR can be one of the best financial options to fund that. But we have to get there. So our experience is that it takes a couple of years to get the policy done. And once you have the policy, implementation takes as well a couple of years. So if you want to see in the short run improvements, what we have seen is that you can do something around market interventions. This is something we've done, for example, in the Prevent Waste Alliance with the Econ pilot, where we piloted a collection and sustainable treatment in Nigeria and combined it as well with our partner Closing the Loop with their financial model, e-waste compensation. As GIZ, we did as well an incentive scheme where we used the collection strength of the informal sector in Ghana, accumulated volumes in a collection center, and then the volumes are tendered to formal recyclers. So that's a way of integrating informal actors while guaranteeing compliance and environmental standards in the e-waste field. We can think along the line as well of doing some interventions around supporting the implementation of the PIC procedure, because this is a pain point to some of the recyclers, and other panelists will speak about that one. Then in the midterm, it's a lot about infrastructure investment as well. Establishing, for example, a PRO, so producer responsibility organization, and to develop markets for environmentally sound management of e-waste. They will not just appear out of nowhere. It will take some time. And in the long run, of course, we can focus on product design. We would love to see fully functional PROs everywhere and have fully functional markers for environmentally sound management of e-waste. And so some of the examples for market interventions are there. We know there are a lot more. And one way of, let's say, putting these interventions forward is to act in multi-actor partnerships. So that's why we are happy to support, for example, the Prevent Waste Alliance or the STEP initiative, or to cooperate with other partners like CP or the World Economic Forum. Having said that, I will hand over to my colleague Jana, who will speak about our activities in the Prevent Waste Alliance.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also a warm welcome from my side. My name is Jana Mandl, and I'm, as Alexander, advisor at GIZ. And GIZ, the GIZ project I'm working in is also hosting the Prevent Waste Alliance on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And in this session today, I'm speaking in my role as the working group co-lead of the Prevent Waste Alliance's e-waste working group, which has around 100 members from more than 30 countries working on e-waste related topics. And here we are mainly working along 3 topics, which is financing and treatment mechanisms, repair, reuse, refurbishment, and transboundary movement of e-waste. And yeah, I would now like to give you a brief overview of Prevent's activities on transboundary movement of e-waste. Next slide, please. So Prevent is looking at transboundary movement for, movements from low and middle income countries to countries with appropriate recycling infrastructure. And yeah, so many actions can be taken to render electronics more circular. This includes repair, refurbishment, and reuse. And as the last resort, also recycling. And if done properly, it can be a source for job creation and also resource conservation. So local recycling should therefore be supported and always preferred over exporting waste. But in countries without sustainable recycling infrastructure, exports present the only realistic option for environmentally sound management and recycling. And unfortunately, this necessarily transboundary movements are currently not functioning well. And this is not only risking the environment and health of people, but also the existence of responsible recyclers in low and middle income countries. Yeah, with the Prevent Waste Alliance, we are working a lot with recyclers in low and middle income countries, and we figured out that the PIC procedure is a real pain point for many compliant recyclers. And some members therefore decided to join forces with a STEP initiative and to draft a discussion paper on their practical experiences with the Basel Convention. And this paper was intended to become the start of a constructive dialogue that can support all actors to better implement and comply with the Basel Convention. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges linked to the PIC procedure that have been identified by the stakeholders? So the implementation of the Basel Convention differs substantially between countries, depending upon available resources and capacity of local authorities. Some countries have signed up and ratified the Basel Convention, but have not transposed it into national law yet. Then there's often a lack of practical experiences or awareness in conducting transboundary movements in competent authorities, by exporters, but also by customs. And even competent authorities often have no experiences in processing the notification and movement documents in practice. Then the lack of awareness and enforcement in customs can lead to penalties for compliant Basel shipments, while undeclared hazardous waste shipments pass unnoticed. And we have also different national implementation around the world. So there's no really harmonized system. We have differing definitions, tariff codes, administrative process and documentation needs between countries. So there's no harmonized system. Then in order to get shipments done, you need the approval of the sending and the receiving country and the approval of all transit nations. And some of those transit countries never respond. And this makes sea carriers reluctant to take hazardous waste on board because they fear the risk of vessels being blocked in transit countries for a very long time. And another risk for shipping companies is the potential danger of this kind of hazardous wastes and fire risks, especially for lithium-ion batteries. Then there's very high costs involved with the PIC procedure. There are cases where the procedure doubled the cost of the shipping. So the highest single notification was 20,000 euros. Then you also need bank guarantees when you want to ship. And finally, the paperwork can be very time consuming. So notifications can take from several months to even years. And the longest process reported was 5 years. And you can tell that this is really not a business process anymore. All this is leading to challenges in complying with the provision of the Basel Convention in practice. So what are the implications of this? Illicit trade is in many countries, and it's definitely easier to do it illegally than legally. And this leaves recyclers with difficult decisions on managing hazardous waste. So you can either simply avoid managing hazardous waste, you can store the hazardous waste until you can export it, you can give it to some informal actors not following standards who might just dump the waste, or export fractions falsely declared as used goods or undeclared. So to some extent, you can conclude that the current implementation of the Basel Convention is hindering environmentally sound management, as well as the creation of a level playing field, disadvantaging those recyclers who want to comply with trade rules. And the Prevent STEP working group therefore sees a need to improve the implementation and compliance, as well as to innovate within the existing system for both recyclers and authorities. And besides gathering those experiences, the paper also proposed some solutions and sets the stage to develop follow-up activities with parties to improve the implementation of PIC. But some of these solutions will be presented later in the session. Then let me go briefly to another project we had within the Prevent Waste Alliance. So to tackle some challenges, the Prevent Waste Alliance also just recently completed a pilot project on the practical implementation of the Basel Convention technical guidelines in Tanzania. It was conducted by UNITA, WRF, Tanzanian Vice President's Office, and the National Environmental Council, as well as the Eastern African Community Organization. And in this project, general awareness on the Basel Convention was created, roles and responsibilities were clarified, In Tanzania, trainings for inspectors and port authorities were given, and an inspection checklist was developed to better distinguish between used products and e-waste. Yeah, the results from this pilot, including the inspection checklist and the training material, will soon be published at the Prevent website. And yeah, thank you for your attention, and back to Alexander.
Thanks, Jana, for the comprehensive presentation. And right now, I will allow Alexander Jandrich to unmute himself, and he will give a presentation on challenges in e-waste management in Latin America and the study that the Solving the E-Waste Problem initiative has developed in their Latin America e-waste working group. So, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. So, as stated before, my name is Alexander Jandrich, and I'm a co-managing director of Solving the E-Waste initiative. And here I would like to just take a more direct approach of a publication that is, as of today, available also in English. It is very good complementary work to the paper that Jana has already published, so we'll go a bit into more details. Next slide, please. Just briefly on the STEP initiative. The STEP initiative was established in 2007 as one of the first international initiatives on tackling the e-waste problems. It has basically two main objectives. One is prevention of generating the e-waste if possible, and then when this is not possible, treating e-waste in environmentally, economically, and ethically sound way. We are a group of diverse members, at the moment around 40, ranging from UN organization, specific country, governmental organizations, universities, recyclers, and recycler organizations as well. Next slide, please. So the STEP is operating in the working groups. There are 4 thematic working groups at the moment. So one is on the off-grid solar equipment, then pervasive electronics, working group on the lack of markets, and the working group on extended producer responsibility. Beside those, there are different working groups as well at the moment. The one in regional working group for Latin America, and the publication that I'll talk a bit more about it is the fruit of their labor. And then also the joint working group with the Prevent Waste Alliance, as Jana and Alexander already presented very beautifully. Thanks. So in this publication, it goes a bit more particularly into the details, going further in this transboundary movement of the electronic waste, and this time particularly for the Latin America and the Caribbean. The paper discusses the difficulties faced by the e-waste managers, but also on the governmental bodies as well, and governmental representatives, and also aims to provide solutions. This means not only that there is a situation assessment there, but also what could be the proposed solutions from these different stakeholder groups to facilitate the transboundary movement of e-waste and support the circularity of materials. The first part of the publication is focusing on the current situation, so the status assessment. The second part is are the results of surveys and discussion panels with different stakeholder groups. And the third part is offering different solutions based on the countries that were participating. Next slide, thanks. So after evaluating the responses from the surveys, the main reasons what the recyclers say, why are they exporting, is 60% of the respondents said that they have better processing opportunities or no local alternative for processing of certain fractions from e-waste in their local countries. Then adjacent to that one are the better prices. Again, this is something that is very closely related to the available technology, and then more detailed disassembly and so on. When we are talking about the fractions, then the components that are most frequently exported are the printed circuit boards. 30% of everybody said or interviewed recyclers said that they are exporting them, and they are exporting them mainly to European Union, USA, and Japan. Then the next most frequently exported fractions are generally non-ferrous metals. These are also exported to China, the EU, USA, Korea, and so on. And then there's a list of other fractions that are also exported with more or less prevailing countries of destination countries. Next slide. Thanks. So when we are talking about the challenges, then the permit duration is something that is the greatest challenge, with 27% of the respondents saying this, then the process clarity, times and deadlines, and so on. And then when we are talking about the discussion results of these workshops that have been conducted with different stakeholders, the positive experiences have been the good knowledge basis of the entrepreneurs, so meaning that the companies are relatively agile in the region to get up to the speed. What are the requirements for them to export the fractions from the e-waste? Then the notification and responses from the country of destinations are very quite agile, meaning that the administration on the receiving end is functioning really good. And the problems are the high turnover of personnel, meaning that in the local country, when the administration, when some person has been designated to be tackling this problem and has been already proficient with this, they would change positions. Then the new networks need to be built up. They need to be brought up to the speed and so on. So this results in long waiting times for responses. And then even in some cases, due to the mostly due to the fear of the local governmental employees, that they are creating the situation which favor the informal markets. Next slide, please. So here is the link and the QR code for this publication, which you can find on the web on the STEP website, free to download for everybody. And if there are any other questions, there will be my contacts as well there as well. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to present STEP and to introduce myself, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are later.
So thank you, Alexander, for the insightful presentation. And with this part of the presentation, we will close the first panel. The discussion will take place after the second panel, and I will now invite Reinhard Smith to speak about experiences with the PIC procedure. He's a co-founder of Closing the Loop, a company that has been innovating the concept of e-waste compensation, which is an interesting financing approach if you want to kickstart sustainable e-waste management in a country. And he will speak about his experiences with Basel PIC procedures. So Reinhard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alexander. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to see you all here. And I will indeed share some of our experiences very specifically with transporting waste from West Africa to Europe. It should be said that quite a bit of this might be repetition. It's also some of the things that were in the discussion paper, but I'm hoping to add a few very specific examples of what the private sector runs into when trying to do these transports. To reiterate the point that was made earlier, it is very specifically transports from non-OECD countries, in our case, Western African countries or just African countries to Europe. And we stay away from the discussion of illegal transports going to countries that cannot handle them. We are specifically transporting to countries that can handle the processing of the waste that we transport. So a little bit about the company. We've been in operation for about 10 years. We offer sustainability as a service. Won't go into the details of how we do that right now, but the relevant fact for this is that we have transported waste from more than 10 African countries. We've done quite a few different pick procedures that included a lot of transit countries, more than 15 countries in total. I've listed some on the slide, which countries we've actually exported from, and we've learned a lot along the way. I'll be honest, 10 years ago, I'd never heard about the Basel Convention yet. And now I think our organization is one of the most experienced companies with electronic waste, specifically from African countries. So I want to go into again why it's necessary to ship waste. First of all, there is a lot of waste. There's a lot of, if you talk about circular economy, there's a lot of higher things on the ladder of what we can do to be more sustainable. But the fact of the matter is there is waste in places where that waste cannot be treated. And so therefore there's a need to transport that. There's no sound infrastructure in a lot of countries, which leaves you with the only viable option at the moment to be shipping. A next step would, of course, be to create infrastructure and capabilities in these same countries that can currently not process them. And something that's quite important to be able to do that from a business perspective, from an investment perspective, is to create the business case that proves that this is a good idea. It might surprise some of you, maybe not, but there are still people who think there's maybe not enough waste in a lot of African countries to justify building a recycling plant in Africa. Those who have been there will know that's not the case, and that case simply needs to be proven from a business side. So diving into the challenges that we have as a company dealing with the pick procedure, some of this were mentioned already by Jana because they were in the discussion paper. One of the central things we've noticed is different interpretations. Of course, the convention allows for national interpretation of the convention. This becomes a problem when they contradict each other. I'll give some examples of that a bit later. Also, there's a lot of states that lack capacity in order to deal with the number of requests that are coming in, whether it be lack of experience in doing so or simply lacking the financial resources that are necessary to process applications. There's the obvious language barriers very often. Of course, the convention allows for using your language of choice as a party, and that for a company creates a lot of costs when it comes to translating financial guarantees that are 30 pages long, for example. There are very long lead times, which was also mentioned before. Our longest application took 18 months. 5 years is something I've heard as well. So this, from a business perspective, is very critical to being able to run a company. The second one is with very long lead times, the validity of a notification, a pick procedure that's been approved becomes an issue because you can only choose a date so much in advance, and when you've spent 6 months doing so, your 1-year permit is no longer valid 6 months after the fact. And all of this is followed by high costs, whether it's costs from overhead in order to deal with the application in the first place, or the millions of dollars that are stuck in bank guarantees. If you do 2 different applications for the same waste exporting from the same country simply because you need 2 different transporters, that means you have twice the amount of money stuck in bank guarantees until that notification expires. So some examples that we have is we've had some states that require a bank guarantee in order to process the notification, so you don't get a notification number. And then we have banks that require a notification number before they will give you a bank guarantee. This creates an obvious dilemma because you can get neither without the other, which requires a lot of discussion with either the bank or the competent authorities for one of them to break their rules of how they process. A second one is that we had an example where a process in a country was that they provide a letter of providing the conditions for transport, but the letter does not specifically mention consent, whereas the importing country wanted the word consent in there. Different processes created a problem again that had to be fixed, costing time and money. The disagreement on the various codes, whether it's the hazardous codes of products or the customs codes, and that is also linked to problems that you get with customs. A lot of waste does not have value at the end of processing, which means that you're transporting something with a zero value on a commercial invoice. There are countries where customs simply does not accept this because they don't understand why you would ship something that's not worth any money. So you have to create a fake invoice, fake money, and then pay fake exporting taxes on something that has no value at all. And this is, again, a lack of understanding between customs and the authorities that deal with as a competent authority for the Basel Convention. Another problem is the updating of competent authority names, who are the focal points in various countries. You go through the whole process and find out that someone has changed. Various authorities accept that as no problem. It has been changed. Some people tell you to go back to the first step and reapply simply because you had a wrong name on the list of competent authorities. For a lot of states, especially in the global south, there are not very clear guidelines on what you should follow as a company in order to apply in the PIC procedure. This means that it's, first of all, unclear. You've got to go through a lot of process to get answers on what they are. But you also notice that various states are not aware of how the other states interpret the convention. So it's not only that companies don't understand the competent authorities, it's that they also often don't understand each other and therefore start contradicting each other. And then we have the classical who signs first situation. We are asked, for example, sometimes that transit countries should approve before the receiving party signs, and then the transit countries expect a signature from the receiving country before they will sign. Again, going back and forth between two contradicting interpretations of the convention. There's a lot of consequences specifically on logistics because of this. A lot of these processes take time and have legal consequences if they go wrong. And the safest thing for many carriers is to simply say no. So one after the other, shipping carriers have said, we will simply not transport waste anymore because it's too much of a hassle. Any money we would have made on your containers will be spent on paperwork, and therefore it's not a good business decision. The consequence of this is not that people stop shipping waste. It is that people stop classifying their transport as waste. They will simply put it in a container and mention it as something else. This complexity makes it harder for shipping companies to simply comply as well. Another one is, of course, something that has been discussed a lot already here, is the fact that it's all paper-based. Taking papers along with a container on a ship simply is not how things work anymore in 2023. So you have to move around that somehow. Most authorities accept that, but it is still a problem. This is the same thing when it comes to signing the movement documents when an actual transport happens. One example we had of a logistical challenge is that we were asked by a state to provide a 6-hourly for the entire transport of 6 weeks. To every 6 hours, update them on the location of the vessel, the amount of fuel on the vessel, the amount of personnel on the ship. Also something that is not logical for anyone to do. Of course, the reasons historically for this make complete sense, but in transports that I mentioned, this does not make sense anymore. And this also comes down to the operational realities of shipping. You have to state the exact date of loading, and if that date is not always met, there could be traffic jam, and this is the same with routes, the routes that the vessel has to sail. Vessels change ports sometimes because of a malfunction, or a road is blocked and you have to take a different road. Simply a truck taking a different turn would make that shipment under the convention an illegal shipment. So there are, of course, possibilities for improvement. I'm not here only to talk about the problems, and we do manage this shipment. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are very happy with how we're working, but it can be better, especially because we would like others to also follow the right procedures. And that's one of them I mentioned. I think more organizations that are doing shipments should go through the process of applying for the PIC procedure and doing things properly, because this will increase capacity and transparency leads to more business, more of a business case for local recycling. I also think collaboration beyond the specific lines of the PIC procedure would be good. Competent authorities sitting together talking about, okay, how can we make this shipment possible, whether it's through Article 11 or whether it's simply a phone call to talk about how procedures can be aligned. And of course, that will lead hopefully to clarity on what is needed in various states and how they differ from each other. in effect, I would love, a handbook that says if you're transporting from here to here, this is what you do as a company. And lastly, when we do capacity building, there's a lot of focus on capacity building. Use real world cases, not hypotheticals. This is the case in various domains, but the legislators are often not the ones who understand the operational implications. So make sure actual operational projects or shipments are included when working on capacity building so that real world examples can be used. Thanks.
Now there's some so there's still an echo, but now it's gone. So I don't know exactly where it was coming from. So thank you, Reinhard, to giving some very practical perspectives on what it actually means if you want to do the right thing in treating hazardous waste in some African countries. And Reinhard was speaking about light at the end of the tunnel. And I would say that Ghana is one of the cases where they have been proactive to support companies in how to do the shipments. And I would like to invite Larry Coteau. He's the director leading the Ghana e-waste program and the coordinator of the World Bank funded Africa Environmental Health and Pollution Management Program. So Larry, please unmute yourself and speak about the good activities you're implementing in Ghana.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences with you. First of all, I would like to give a bit of a background where, in the context of Ghana, we need to differentiate between our experiences with our long-term experiences with ULAPs within the context of the PIC procedures, and also other e-waste types. So Ghana, for some time now, had experiences with ULAPs, which is not a problem because we have a lot of recycling capacity. Our main challenge has been with the other e-waste types. So in 2021, we had a national audit of e-waste recycling facilities in terms of determining their capacity in country. And I must also say that we have a bit of a difference between levels of recycling within the context of in Ghana. So I must say that our audits in terms of the classification of recyclers in Ghana review very interesting scenarios in terms of capacity-wise. And in connection with it to the PIC procedures, I must say that only 3 out of 25 companies that we audited have even heard about the Basel procedures and the PIC procedures before. And closing the loop, I must say, is one of the companies that are very much within the knowledge of what the PIC procedures are. Secondly, I must also state that Ghana has already transposed the Basel Convention into our national laws. So we have a national law that defines the procedure that you need to go through if you want to import or export e-waste into any country. And the requirements are clear. But I must also admit that most of the challenges that have been highlighted are also things that we are dealing with internally. And I will not go back to relook at it again. But what we actually decided to do after the audit was actually to go back with the recyclers to take them through a capacity training program where we have to introduce to them what the Basel procedures are or even what the PIC procedures are. First of all, most of them also lack the internal national requirements that will even enable them to apply for the procedures in the first place. So there are internal procedures that they need to comply with in terms of having permit to even operate the facilities that they are operating. And that makes it even a bit of a challenge if they want to export waste that we don't even know how they came by those waste products. But it's understandable because we have a bit of integration between the informal sector and then the formal sector. And I'm sure the informal sector normally collects a lot for the formal recyclers, and most of them will carry on with the process from there. So in terms of our capacity building program with the recyclers, we decided to take them through the requirements. But most interesting is the part that most of them don't even understand the waste classification that is being used by Basel. And that was even a challenge for us to start with. So in completing the forms, they don't even understand the Basel Annex 4, Annex 3, Annex 2 waste streams. They have no idea. So these are the challenges that we decided to start from scratch, in how they can actually comply with the PIC procedures. And customs is also on the other side. They are also, in terms of capacity, they are also on the low side. They also don't have enough capacity to understand all these classifications that the Basel talks about. So we decided to go through a different processes with the customs as well. So we brought the customs and then also the recyclers into one workshop to actually do a needs assessment as to how we can improve the capacity of our local recyclers to actually undertake these PIC procedures. And this is based on the fact that we lack a lot of recycling facilities in Ghana. And it's a fact that we might have to export some of our hazardous waste in future. And as already indicated, most of them are storing some of these waste because they don't have the option to take them out. And some of them also lack the capacity to recycle them. So at the end of the process, there's also a discussion about how we can also make the process a bit easier, which I also agree with all the comments that has already been stated. But in terms of making it easy, there's a proposal that we digitize the PIC procedures going forward. But obviously, this has to be done in consultation with other parties that will be willing to go through that process with us in order to eliminate a lot of the paperwork that takes a lot of time to actually undertake a shipment. So that is our recommendation going forward, how we intend to make the process a bit easier, recognizing the other underlying bottlenecks. But the way forward is to digitize the Basel procedures in terms of the PIC, and then also make the process a bit easier. But that is something that will be discussed in more detail with other parties. Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity.
So thank you, Larry, for being available after a flight yesterday to Ghana and in early morning on a Sunday. So it was highly appreciated. And your good work in Ghana on improving the overall situation on e-waste management, and as well the aspect of the Basel notification is highly appreciated. Having said that, I will invite our last panelist today, Kimberly Botwright from the World Economic Forum. She is the head of sustainable trade, and she will give us some perspective on trade facilitation and green lanes and the work they do over there. So, Kimberly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. And thank you to the fellow panelists. I thought you've given some great insights. So I'm going to recap what I've heard from some of you and also where I think most of you are at in the room, just to give some context on why trade facilitation before we make that leap. So we all agree here that the Basel Convention sets the parameters for transboundary movement of hazardous and other waste. And it's an absolutely vital tool for tackling waste dumping, particularly in developing countries. I think we're all on the same page with that. I think we're also on the same page that while the trade controls established by the Convention are vital, in practice, they are poorly implemented. I'm speaking frankly because I think that's what we've heard from all of our panelists. And that is leading to a system that's abused by illegal traders and then makes it difficult for responsible players. Who are those responsible players? They're companies in both advanced and developing countries who are serious about meeting their sustainability targets, who are looking to use circular resources and drive net zero outcomes, because the circular economy is a big part of achieving our net zero future as well. And I think that's really important we remember that. And I think that what that all means is that there's a significant responsibility for those of us that are in this room here to actually get this system right and to think about how we have trade facilitation for responsible players. So what can we do with all of this landscape? Well, I think, again, huge congratulations to the process that is going on here, because I know you are undertaking a review of the PIC process, as well as looking at how you can digitize it. So those are really positive steps. And I think my job here today is to encourage you to take a little field trip down the road to the WTO and then back in country to your to your trade ministries and talk to them about their experience of trade facilitation. And I think this is relevant both for the general PIC updating conversation as well as for ePIC and digitalization. And then I'll come on to what you could do also around the concept of green lanes too. So if you were to take a little field trip down the road to the WTO, in 2013, they agreed the Trade Facilitation Agreement. That's nearly 10 years ago, and they've spent 10 years working on actually implementing that arrangement. And that is all focused on how you make sure that customs and the agencies that have to interact with customs to get the trade that they want into and out of their country, and then also address the trade that they don't want, is actually done effectively and efficiently. The gains from the Trade Facilitation Agreement are enormous. Their statistics indicate that the gains from the Trade Facilitation Agreement actually accumulate to more than lowering of tariffs over the last few years. So it's really significant to think about that and the experience that this community has. Some of their experience has actually gone down, it stems from the national level. So as part of implementing this agreement, there are national trade facilitation committees that are set up, and they then report into at the global level. So my encouragement to you would be to talk to them, listen from their experience and understand what they've been doing, because there's a few things that they have been doing that are very relevant when you want to talk about perhaps improving the PIC process. They would also be relevant if you were thinking about digitizing it. So an example of work that we're doing at the World Economic Forum with the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation is we've been working to help digitize sanitary and phytosanitary certificates that accompany agriculture trade. So those are often used by countries. If you digitize them, it can help with some of the challenges that are actually being mentioned here today that are present in agriculture trade. And while agriculture trade isn't hazardous waste trade, it is still really important that there are accompanying certificates that certify that that food is safe to export or import. And so these projects really have been going on, and countries really have been putting in place digital customs processes or for specific types of certificates, and those learnings could be applied here. So my encouragement to you all here today is that there is a significant responsibility for this process that you're in charge of and that you can update. But you're not alone, and there are also learnings that are out there, and there is work that's done by a whole community that you can draw from. Then I also want to just talk a little bit about green lanes. So what is this concept? Now, while you're hopefully going to update the whole system, there may be the case where some of you may want to go further and deeper with certain trusted countries. Maybe those are in your region. We already have the concept of an Article 11 arrangement under the OECD. So they have a system which moves slightly more rapidly than the PIC procedure, and there are reasons for that. They've outlined that, etc. But if you're within ASEAN or you're in the South Africa Customs Union and you want to, you trust your neighbors, you've got regional arrangements that you can build something on top of, here is where you could really look at developing a kind of green lane for responsible legal recycling trade. You can do that, but I think it would be really important, again, so that these systems aren't just developed all in an ad hoc way, which also really important to define what do we consider as trust? What does a trusted trader program actually look like? And how does it lead to actually good environmentally sound outcomes? That actually some thought is given to what the principles behind such a green lane might look like. And so that's something that we've started thinking about a little bit with the Circular Electronics Partnership as well, and are starting to think about coming up with a list of those principles to help guide the development of such arrangements should regions wish to use them. And lastly, going back to if you do take your field trip, which I hope you do, there's another group that I want to make you aware of within the trade community. And that's a group of 70 countries. So some of you will be part of that, who are undertaking trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions. So it's a mouthful, but we like acronyms here. It's called TESTI for short. And that group is actually meeting next week at the WTO. They have a working group on trade and the circular economy. And they are actually talking about very similar issues that you are talking about. So there is a community that's absolutely ready to dock in and to sit down and brainstorm on what are the best learnings from trade facilitation globally that you can use to update the whole process. But also, if you were to want to use green lanes between another yourself and another party in a trusted sense within a region, defining some of those principles, there is real appetite for actually looking into that and sitting down and thinking about it. But it strikes me that there are two conversations happening about the fact that we have this system, as my panelists have just described it. These conversations are happening both here within a multilateral environment agreement context, but they're also happening within a trade agreement context. Now, in 20 years ago, I think trade was trade and environment was environment, but that is not the case today, and we all know that. Trade people, when you speak to them, they know that trade has to be sustainable. This is something that they care about. They want to figure out how within their countries they can get the trade that they want and not have the trade that they don't want. That's really critical. And so there is a real readiness to work together. So I would encourage you to break down those silos, and I will leave it there. Thank you.
So having you on the panel hopefully contributes to breaking down those silos. So Kimberly was today the last panelist of us, and we will now turn to the discussions. So I would like to invite people from the audience if they have some questions for clarification or comments or suggestions they would make to us. And I have seen the first hand raised in the front. I will start here, and then we'll go to the back, and then over there. And please introduce yourself that we.
Thanks, I'm Charles from the UK. Really short and sweet. Could you just run through the acronym for the TESTI, was it again?
Trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions.
Thanks.
And if you Google that and then put WTO, they have a space on the WTO website. Yep. So this is open and transparent as well.
So that was very quick. Over there in the back, the man raising his hand.
Thank you for your lecture. I just want to make a brief addition to the situation in Nigeria. As Yale talked about from the representative in Ghana. Anyway, let me make a brief introduction of myself. My name is Oyewole. I'm the head of division hazardous waste management, cleaner production and environmental extension services, Federal Ministry of Environment, Abuja, Nigeria. As earlier said by the Ghana representative, there are many problems being encountered too. As related to Nigeria, you talked about a high cost. Well, some of those things that we do, we have had a sort of ready-made cost for what we are really doing in terms of inspection, visit by officers that will go for the to inspect your goods or your waste before exportation. Also paperwork. Yes, we need to do some paperwork because we believe that we should carry out this basic, the environmental management of hazardous waste in an environmentally sound manner. Then the time consumption. Well, sometimes we don't have much time consumption from our side, but it is the people coming to get the permit. They do do cost some of the time that been consumed. For example, when they fill the notification form, which is very, very important. Before, when you are filling the notification form, you need to let us know the carrier. But you start changing carrier. Then maybe by the time you are filling the form, you are not sure of the type of carrier you wanted to use. But when you keep on, changing, that may also cause a delay. Then also, where you are taking the waste to, we need to know the name of your partner where you are taking the waste to for recycling. So if you don't know, then that may also cause a time delay. Then sometimes we're talking of transit countries. I think by the time you are filling the form, you should make us know these transit countries clearly shown on your forms. But by the time you start changing, like the ones that was I think Hickley, we know. I mean, we surely know about this. When you are whether you are talking about you are taking it through Morocco, then you are changing it to another transit country. So those things really contribute to the time delay. And as per the bank maybe bank reference, yes, of course we need to know, because we don't want 419 companies or facilities to just carry waste from up and dump it in another side of the world. Then they start talking about Nigeria. So all those things are the things that do consume time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a very good example of how there are procedures in each country. From personal experience, I can say that Nigeria has quite a clear list of this is what's needed in order to process a big procedure. And I think what the gentleman from the Federal Ministry said, it is indeed clear these are the various steps that every company needs to follow. And what I would say is, I would actually put that to discussion, is how do we make sure that is clear from all the states? It's the differences between, for example, Nigeria and Ghana, or any transit state that you go into that creates the complexity, because not all countries do have it as clear or as transparent on paper for business. So thank you very much for that addition.
I think there was a question over here in the front.
Sure, Jim Puckett, Basel Action Network. I want to make 3 points, 3 questions. The first one has to do with the green lanes. That triggers a bit of concern for me because Article 11 we're finding today is being misused. We're going to be doing a side event on that on Wednesday night about what really is misuse of Article 11 according to how it's drafted. So just be aware that it can be no less environmentally sound than the convention. That's like the bottom line requirement. So it could streamline things perhaps, but it really can't change the fundamental obligations. So I'd be keen to see your papers on that and maybe help develop that concept. The second thing is I'm kind of shocked what I'm hearing lately about costs. when we conceived the convention, there was not an idea that this was going to be a revenue generating project for countries. This is about improving the environment. So the idea that countries would actually charge for implementing the convention is really corruption in my view. It's a non-tariff trade barrier that shouldn't be happening. This is all about trying to improve the environment when the exports are really going to internalize costs and not to externalize them, which is the subject of this side event. And so we're going to have to find some really good ways to attack that. People should not be charging thousands of dollars to have an application for consent and notification. So that one's going to require some more thought, but I think it's just not something we can tolerate. And I understand it's happening in Europe as well. So the third one is, I'm interested in your opinion. I think the first thing that we might be able to accomplish, I hope, is to digitize the system. But after that, what is the next barrier that you can see? You put a whole laundry list of barriers. What would be the one that would be next that would be most useful to tackle? Is it education, or is it other ways to incentivize uniformity, or what have you? But I'm really interested to know if we can achieve the digitization, make it very useful, easy to use the PIC process in an interactive way, what would be the next thing we'd want to do? Thank you.
So I guess the first question was directed to Kimberly, so we'll invite her to speak on that.
Thanks. Just say I agree. I think that's why there's a need for a bit of a discussion on what could be some principles for green lanes. At least in the last 2-3 years, I've heard various forms of various expressions used to describe that concept. So it's green lane, resource recovery lane, trusted trader, passporting, and indeed the EU has its own passporting thing as well for a number of products that will be coming online. So there'll be some interesting learnings there. But it's an interesting concept because you may have specific regions that would want to do that and maybe go a bit deeper, and they can establish because of their proximity or because they're in a customs union already, they could establish trust. But I think we need to somehow still have a bit of some kind of, ideally, international guidance on what exactly a good green lane looks like. So it's sort of like, if you're going to go down that route, okay, we have Article 11 in the Convention, but how do you make sure that you can ensure that there is the equivalent ESM outcome? So I think that's where some kind of principles for green lanes would be really powerful, and perhaps working with that testee group that has the trade facilitation experience, but then also with the policymakers here whose objective is environmental protection. Somehow bringing those together, I think, would be really forward-looking. Thanks.
And Reinhard, you already indicated that you want to respond. Okay.
Yeah, but the second question about costs, there is definitely some truth in the fact that for some states it is used as a revenue generating matter, which I agree with you is not the right way to go. But I also want to clarify that it is our experience that in most states it's more about covering the costs associated with this. We should not forget that there are many states that have underfunded agencies that simply don't have the money to process, or even to some states don't even have money for fuel to go and do the inspection. So a lot of these fees are legitimate fees charged to countries simply because there's a lack of capacity. Now, we can argue about why that's the case, but the reality is, because it becomes more complex, that increases the costs for an authority to follow the procedure in the first place. But I think the majority of the costs in our case is not necessarily the fees for application. It is the process itself lasting 6 months. The bank guarantees that need to be revised all the time. That is the majority of the cost. The overhead is simply immense. Or when a permit expires and you can't do your shipment, the consequences of that, those are the higher costs. But I do agree there are some states that use it as revenue generations, and that is an issue that is maybe not left for this forum.
And maybe to your third question, I'm not an expert on actually doing the notifications, but I would say from our experience in GIZ is making the PIC procedure work will not guarantee environmentally sound management in countries. So if we actually want to have that in countries, we have to discuss how to develop those markets and to create a level playing field for sustainable e-waste management. And I would say that's a precondition or can be a condition to allow more sustainable trade there. So that's I would say, a larger issue. I know it is being discussed on EPR over here, but as already presented in my initial statement, it will take some time that EPR system on national legislation actually is translated into impact on the ground to see the results we all want. So that's, I would say, another issue that needs to be tackled there. It's not directly a response to your question, but that's a very, I would say, general comment. Now I've seen there was one hand by IPEN, so please. Okay, so then we have Tadessa, then there's another comment over there and a third one over there. We're just 2 minutes left, so be very brief or else contact us. No, we have 15 minutes left, I'm sorry. So please raise your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tadessa Amara from Pan Ethiopia and co-chair of IPEN. Thank you very much, all the presenters, for giving us these eye-opening presentations. And I also know part of the work in Nigeria and also in Ghana. As you mentioned, this business is not a profitable business per se, and this cannot depend only on the one way of making the business or depending only on the issues that are going on so far. And one of the things, as you mentioned, is having extended producer responsibility regulations nationally are very important. Because we saw, for example, in Ethiopia, we have an e-waste management regulation, which has also EPR, the first product EPR in the national regulation. But in order to act and also in order to shorten the procedures in the bureaucratic processes, if you have EPR and if that EPR has a designated national authority in the country, that will really shorten the processes. And how are you working also on that aspect in building the capacities of governments to formulate EPR and regulations nationally? That's one question. The other one is what's coming in the country is going out. Now, from the Basel perspective, you are trying to show us the other direction, how e-waste is coming out from developing countries to the developing world for environmentally sound management of e-waste. But how are you looking at the e-products that are coming into the country? Because end-of-life items, substandard items, and all those, especially if you see Nigeria and Ghana, the porous borders and the ports and everything, how are you looking at this? Maybe this circularity can have a wrong way, like e-waste is illegally coming into the country and given to you for an unprofitable business. So how are you also looking at how the e-products are coming to in these countries, and how are you also looking at the green procurement, because it should also be linked to green procurement in the country so that you don't end up in receiving those wastes from Europe or other countries and taking them back with no profit from your side or from the business side. Thank you very much.
I think we will collect some questions and then I will moderate it. So please, the gentleman over there.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity, and to the presenters for the presentations. It's Hautem Kwena from South Africa. Just interested on the instrument you mentioned for assessing whether the product is e-waste or a secondary product, and whether that instrument is it working with national legislation. I think you might have mentioned Rwanda or so. Thank you.
Thank you. And now.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I found it to be very, very informative. And my name is Patricia Whiting, and I represent Sims Limited. And under that umbrella is Sims Lifecycle Services, which does e-waste. And then we have our metals people, and then we have municipal solid waste. And as a little bit of background, for over 20 years, I worked for the US EPA, and I was the competent authority for Basel for over a decade. For the past decade, I've worked for Sims, and so I see both sides. I see the civil servant, and I see the people that actually have to make your bottom line and live, the people that are trying to do things responsibly. But I want to start out saying that I completely agree with Kimberly. I mean, the whole goal, I mean, the reason the convention was drafted 30 years ago was because of a public outcry of waste being dumped on developing countries, in particular, Africa. And that was in the sense of more stringent regulations in the 1980s, and people wanted, they were costly, so the developed countries were trying to move around them. But keep in mind that it was developed in a paradigm of disposal versus recovery, in linear thinking, you know, make, use, throw away versus circular. So now, you know, we've evolved and we have all these issues with PIC, and we have all this information that we could leverage. And I'm not a party, I'm an observer. But, you know, I've watched these groups within here, and I assured one of our biggest clients when this passed that was very anxious, that's from a European country who has terrible problems with the PIC, don't worry, it's 3 years away until the effective date. There'll be 2 more COP cycles. At the last OEWG, they went on and on about whether it would be an EWG, expert working group, I'm sorry, OEWG, which is the last meeting, whether it would be an expert working group or an intersessional working group. All this talk around that. Yesterday we went through this paper, and it was about process and whether to acknowledge, quote, or to take note, blah, blah. And so now you have it. The next, I think OEWG is a year from now. And like coming from that paradigm, I was a civil servant. I didn't worry. I mean, the taxpayers paid my paycheck. I mean, I did worry, but to me, a lot of it was an academic exercise. And for example, when I worked in the ESM export working group, we put out so much information. And I remember sitting in Bratislava talking about the whole process of notice and consent. There is so much out there. I feel like there's so much that could be leveraged. And I think money, again, I see enforcement as the biggest thing. You can do all the stuff in the world, but if you don't have people in the ports and you're not putting your money, maybe instead of like putting the money in developing all these books that go on the wall, maybe put it towards other things priority-wise. And so I gently wish that we could just outsource this whole thing to you guys, but we can't. And I wanted to note, in terms of the G20, I was the co-chair of the task force in trade and investment. And it is so true that I don't think the WTO has any idea what's going on in here. I really don't. I mean, I know there's a group that's coming along, but when I see what goes on in there and I see what's going on here, I don't get it. And just with respect to Article 11 agreements, I mean, I agree with Jim, they can be abused. And, you know, I come from a country that is a non-party, and I don't say that proudly. I mean, you know, it's ridiculous. But it is what it is. But we always acted responsibly. For example, the proximity principle. You know what that is? That's the basis of one of the bases of a cornerstone of the convention, that waste should be managed as close to the site as possible. So given that Canada, a developed country, like the US, a developed country, well, my company wouldn't have been able to keep doing what we were doing with our plastics, like it was a closed loop with, you know, the printing cartridges, unless we could work with Canada to get it up to the facility up there that manages it. So there's like, I'm trying to say, there's out of the box creative thinking that has to be put into this. And I just have to say, 2025 is coming, and there's a lot of companies that are doing the right thing that are going to get put out of business. It is what it is. And I also, though, will say with all deference, I hate the bad guys, but you know what? They're still going to be mislabeling this stuff. They're still going to be doing the same thing, and they're not even going to go through the process. It's like a friend of mine said, it's probably in this room. It's like this: you go through the toll, right? You pay the toll, you do the right thing. But on the left, there's a tool that just keeps going through. And so my bottom line is I thank you for bringing these ideas, and I just hope that the group pays attention, in particular, your ideas about field trips and educating themselves beyond, you know, like I don't know how the work is going to progress beyond today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So we have now collected some questions, and I will start with the first question from Pan-Ethiopia and IPAND. And I fully agree, waste business is not profitable per se. The best business case is if you externalize environmental cost. And in the absence of regulation, or I would always say the carrot, like a financing mechanism that actually makes you benefit from being compliant, there is a competitive advantage of not being compliant. And that's a general problem, and it applies, I would say, to all markets. So it must be more beneficial to be compliant. And if there is no financing mechanism on ground, it's even more complicated. And talking about EPR schemes, so within the Prevent Waste Alliance, we developed a product called EPR Toolbox. You can download it on the website. It's predominantly focused on packaging waste, but there are, I think, 10 chapters to it on how to set up an EPR scheme, what are the advantages and disadvantages of it, and what to do there. Additionally, we are in, I would say, discussions with UNEP and WWF to develop an EPR one-stop solution that whatever country is interested to get an initial, let's say, support on what to do around EPR, they can contact that one-stop shop and they will get information there. It's yet to be launched, but we're quite positive that it will come soon. Additionally, ITU is doing some very good work on EPR for the electronics. If you go to their website, there is an EPR course online. I think it's in 4 languages. They have a lot of material over there and extremely experienced in most of the cases advising ministries of information or telecommunication on how to implement EPR. But that's another discussion whether these are the right products. Then on green procurement, ITU will publish a guide on that one. They're working on that one with the GIZ GovStack program. Once it's ready, I'm happy to share that with you. And in regards to the products coming into country, maybe Jana can share, let's say, some perspectives on our pilot we had in Tanzania. But I want to be clear, this was not the discussion for today, because we really want to address the issue of those companies in Latin America and Africa who actually want to do the right thing. And it's hardly ever discussed. And we want to make it possible for them. And I fully agree that the other discussion has to be held as well. But that was the focus of today, rather so from non-OECD to OECD, to indicate that there's as well an issue to be addressed. So Jana.
Yeah, I think each country has to decide for itself what it wants to import. So and communicate this clearly to all the authorities. So in Tanzania, for example, used products are very much welcome because it provides an affordable opportunity for people to or get access to electronics. Unfortunately, the used products are often mixed with e-waste and effective control mechanisms often not in place. That's why we had this pilot project in Tanzania, and it was very important for all authorities to sit together, including the port inspectors, and to decide on what is used products and what is e-waste. So if, for example, if the cable is missing, then it's e-waste. And trainings for port authorities are really important in Tanzania, and they also drafted their own national technical guidelines, so their own Tanzanian version of the Basel Convention. I think that's very important to use also the guidelines provided by the Basel Convention, and use it for your own country, and then do trainings with your port authorities in your country.
Reinhard.
Yeah. I just want to maybe a small reaction to what Patricia from SIMS said. There was a lot of good points that you made, but the one thing I took away is something that Kimberly also allied to is we have the issue of compliance and environmentally sound management. Most of the people in this room are from that side of the governments or the parties you represent. But then there's the issue of trade. And it's very important to look at both of them. And when you're looking at transports, usually from non-OECD to OECD countries, most of the time this is going to be a trade issue as well as, so that trade has to be compliant. Of course, the shipping has to be safe. But I would urge states to also look at this at trade, look at the economic implications it could have for the exporting country. Collecting waste creates jobs. Shipping this waste to other countries creates jobs. It creates a business. And if you look at it from that perspective, as well as sticking to the very important compliance side of things, then it will also incentivize people to go and choose the toll booth where you pay your fee or you do it properly. I think that's very often it's a very challenging role, I think, for authorities, because on the one hand you have to police, but I also think on the other hand there is an opportunity to facilitate business, and that would be my call as a business to parties: is do facilitate those where you know they're doing the right thing. Thanks.
So I think we're almost at the end, and I do apologize that was not inviting the panelists online to speak. I know that Alexander Jandrich already left, but Larry, do you want to make some comments right now on the discussion we had in the room? And
I'm okay, not at the moment.
Okay, then I saw ITI raising the hand, so.
Yes, thank you. Well, one, thank you for this discussion, but I also wanted to just thank GIZ, WEF, and STEP for helping all of us understand some of the challenges, the shared challenges, but also some of the opportunities where we might collaborate on some solutions. Through several meetings now, you've helped me personally, but I think also a lot of the folks we work with understand the different parts that have to fit together to get the system to work the way I believe most competent authorities and responsible actors want it to. We'll have a side event that I know Kimberly will be participating in tomorrow, looking at just one part of this, an early look at a demo for what electronic notification and documentation might look like, sort of an EPIC. Ultimately, that's going to be something the governments have to take on and bring forward, but we attempted to build some of the tools and transparency mechanisms and essentially efficient compliance platforms that we think can come together, again, just to inform an early conversation. And I think some of the discussion that you brought forward has helped the government get comfortable moving forward with PIC modernization, and that's been a very big benefit. So thank you.
Thank you. We're looking forward to that event tomorrow. Having said that, it's time to wrap up the event. So thank you all. Thanks first and foremost to my panelists today. So it's highly appreciated that you took your time on Sunday to contribute, and even to the panelists online. Thank you to all the participants. I believe it has been a fruitful discussion, some interlinks between trade and I would say the environmental community has been made. We've heard a lot, let's say, of the complexity of implementing Basel. We've heard as well about some solutions that might be there for that, and we're looking forward to continue the discussions with all of you in the future. So thank you for staying here, for participating, and yeah, if you have further questions, do not hesitate to contact us now or later online. So thank you.